What's up, guys? We're going to be breaking down the most optimal structure and system for your wealth. So if you're someone wondering if you should have a trust, should you have LLCs, what you should do if you do have these type of structures in place, what you should place in them, we're going to break it all down for you in a very easy to understand way. I promise you, you don't want to miss it. Welcome back, guys. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you like today's content. And of course, if you need help with your own tax and financial plan, reach out to us at www.modernwealth.com. That's modern spelled with no vowels, wealth.com. So before we dive in, first and foremost, this is not legal advice and is general education only. Your wealth structure could look completely different depending on your needs and preferences. The second thing to keep in mind is that this structure we are going to discuss today is geared towards individuals and couples making at least $200,000 and with about $500,000 or so in total assets. So with all that being said, let's get after it. At the center of the structure is you. Everything is going to flow back to you in some capacity. Now, depending on what the asset is, it might make sense to have direct ownership of it. It might make sense to have indirect ownership of it. And the reason for this is that there might be tax or asset protection reasons for this setup. So to kick this all off, what assets are we okay generally owning directly in our name? Well, those are going to be our retirement assets. So our company 401k, that's going to be in our name and we're absolutely okay with it. Our retirement accounts like our IRAs or Roth IRAs, we're okay keeping those assets in our name. Again, very clean and very easy. Now, if you pass away, you want to make sure that you have beneficiaries listed on these accounts so that those accounts pass directly to those individuals that you named. Now, there might be times where it actually might make sense to have a trust be the beneficiary of a retirement account, not the owner, but the beneficiary of a retirement account. For example, when someone passes away and they have minor children and they are the direct beneficiary of the IRA, it might make sense to consider a trust be the beneficiary instead. So the retirement assets component of this equation isn't too bad. But what about everything else? What do you do? Well, this is where a revocable living trust is going to come into the equation. If you're not familiar with a revocable living trust, this is primarily a tool to avoid probate when you pass away. Most people are familiar with the concept of having a will and having a will dictate where your assets go. But what most people don't know is that when you have a will, that will needs to be validated in probate court. So if you passed away and said that your kids are to inherit your home in your will, well, all that has to go through probate court to be validated. Probate court is expensive, it's a public process, and the fees associated with it can be as high as 4% of the total estate in some cases. Plus all the time that you have to spend dealing with probate court. I've literally worked with clients that have had to quit their jobs to deal with their parents' estates. Again, it can get really messy. So to avoid all of this, a lot of folks opt to establish a revocable living trust. The reason why this happens is the living trust is technically a separate entity, and whatever is owned by that trust is going to stay within that structure. So when you pass away, your successor trustee will distribute the assets within that trust according to the terms that you wrote out. Again, this isn't a tool to avoid taxes or protect yourself from lawsuits. This is merely a tool to ensure when you pass away, it's a very clean and smooth transition to the next generation. So the next big question we need to address is what exactly is going to go into this trust? Well, the most common items that would be placed into the trust are non-retirement accounts, like a brokerage account and assets like your home. Now, how this is all done is by retitling the assets to be in the name of the trust. So if you are married and own your home jointly, You would generally file what is called a quitclaim deed to transfer ownership of your home to your revocable living trust. Now notice how the trust flows back to you. Since you are the grantor and trustee of this living trust, there's essentially no difference in ownership. It's merely just an estate planning maneuver to ensure that the home doesn't pass through your will or go through probate court. You're going to do the same thing with non-retirement accounts like a brokerage account. You would generally convert those bad boys over to a trust brokerage account instead of an individual or joint brokerage account. Finally, notice insurances in there. Oftentimes, a family revocable trust is the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. So rather than it passing directly to, let's say, your kids, when you pass away, it would pass through the trust instead. And that's where the trust could perhaps have rules laid out on how that money is to be spent. Now, I know someone out there is wondering, well, what about LLCs? Don't rich people have like a bajillion LLCs and holding companies set up to hold their wealth? Well, the answer is actually no. But for people that do have LLCs, it could end up looking something like this. So if you have an LLC, your LLC would generally be owned directly by your living trust. Now, the reason why someone would want to set up an LLC in the first place is that it creates a barrier between your business and your personal assets. So if your LLC gets sued, there's separation between what's in your living trust and the business assets. Now, the reason why the living trust would own the LLC is for estate planning purposes, like we mentioned earlier. So let's say that you are the owner of a single member LLC taxed as an S Corp. That LLC would be generally owned directly by the living trust. If that business has enterprise value or assets that would be meaningful for your heirs, then it would pass through the trust at your passing rather than potentially having to go through probate. And this would apply to other business-oriented assets as well. So for example, if you have a rental property and that's owned by a real estate LLC that you set up, this real estate LLC would be owned by your family living trust. Finally, let's say you have a series LLC, for example, and that series LLC owns multiple LLCs underneath it. Well, that series LLC that owns all the other LLCs could be owned by your revocable living trust that ultimately flows back to you. So there you have it, guys. A couple final items you should keep in mind. First and foremost, even if you set up LLCs or trusts or whatever it is, none of it matters if you don't properly retitle assets and place them in their respective buckets. So for example, if you set up a living trust and your home is supposed to be part of that trust, and you don't make sure the deed on the home actually reflects that, then it's pointless. For your retirement assets, the big thing is making sure beneficiaries are properly on those accounts. If your Roth IRA should go to your spouse first and then your adult children, then perhaps naming your spouse the primary beneficiary on that account with your children as contingent beneficiaries makes the most sense. Finally, everyone's wealth system that they have in place is going to look different. And there's actually going to be cases where it actually might be fine not to have a trust or any LLCs in place and just simply have a basic will and proper beneficiaries in place. There could be times where we need to introduce a family limited partnership into the mix, right? The sky's the limit, but the structure that you set up is going to be unique to you and your needs. With all that being said, the system that we reviewed today is actually going to be pretty efficient for a lot of people. But again, only you can determine what your actual system will look like. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep getting content just like this. And of course, reach out to us at www.modernwealth.com. That's modern spelled with no vowels, wealth.com. I'll see you next time.